Chapter 25. Rake had spent the rest of the night wide awake, as had the others in the group. They were all scared that the Morprax might return, and they were beginning to imagine what other threats might be found in these mountains. He was now very aware how unfamiliar he was with his surroundings, reliant instead on the guidance of a goblin. He was also painfully aware of how close he had come to being the breakfast of one of the spidery insects. His heart had been beating faster than ever while he had waited for Ellie to master her magic without the aid of her wand. It still beat fast as he watched the sun rise above the mountains that surrounded them. The group warily ate a light breakfast before getting on their way. With as much gratitude as they could offer, the three fairies offered a healing energy to Ellie, who accepted graciously. It allowed her to keep up a comfortable run for most of the morning, with Figwup riding at her shoulder as he had the day before. All of the group kept a more cautious eye on their surroundings. Rake flew ahead with Fliss, scouting for trouble, but there was no sign of any Morprax or anything else. There was a bluish smoke on the horizon, which Rake was informed came from the Blue Mountain. As midday approached, there was a shift in the landscape. The plant life seemed to become less inviting, more thorn bushes and nettles and less pine trees or flowers. Then, as Rake flew around the side of a particularly steep-sided hill, the Valley of Merle came into sight. There was no mistaking it. The entire valley was shrouded in a thick mist, making it impossible to see what lay in the valley. All that was visible, at the edges of the mist, was a high wall of thorny plants. But they weren't just any thorn bushes. These were a constantly moving, writhing mass of deadly-looking barbed thorns that would quickly impale any living thing that got too close. Fliss fluttered into view and stopped to hover beside him.
I wonder if any fairies have tried to enter the valley. Do you think we could just fly in, over the defences?
She asked. Rake had no idea, and said as much, adding, I'm not sure I'd want to be the first to try it. Fliss nodded, and they flew back to meet Ellie. She was still running, not far behind, although looking worn now, even with the magically invigorated muscles. Rake informed her that what they sought lay just around the corner, to which Figwup responded with,
I just told her that.
When it came into view, Ellie stopped running and stared at it. Then she surprised them all a little by saying,
It feels familiar, like I've been here before.
Rake didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They continued toward the valley, together and at a slower pace. That final leg of their journey took about an hour. As they got within a stone's throw of the thorny wall that blocked their entry to the valley, Figwup announced that this was as far as he had ever gone. The mist was beginning to be perceptible, a coldness in the air that sapped energy from the lungs. As he breathed it in, it seemed to give him a sense of foreboding, a strong feeling that something bad was about to happen. Ellie didn't slow, and Rake continued to keep pace with her, even though he was quickly becoming convinced that this was a terrible idea, and that they should have avoided this place. A few paces closer, and Rake began to feel dizzy and disorientated. He could see the thorny wall ahead of him, but his other senses were telling him that he was going the wrong way. If he hadn't had Ellie to follow, he was sure he would be flying in circles. Ellie still hadn't slowed. Rake could see Figwup still on her shoulder, but clutching her tightly, his knuckles white from gripping so hard. Rake didn't blame him. Then Rake saw that Blake's pigeon seemed oblivious to the magic, but his increasingly erratic rider seemed to confuse the bird, which decided to make an awkward landing on Ellie's head. Ellie seemed irritated by the bird at first, but quickly opted to ignore the clumsy animal. The bird looked rather uncomfortable, as Blake seemed to be strangling it a little as he clung to his beloved pigeon for comfort. Ellie, Rake managed to say. It was hard even to concentrate enough to speak. Ellie, I'm not sure that we should go on.
Why? It's just some thorns and a bit of mist,
she said as she turned to face him. He was shocked to see a light smile on her face. Can't you feel it? This place doesn't want us here. He shuddered as he said it. Ellie gave him a quizzical look, and Fliss answered for her.
I don't think she can feel it. I guess Merlin's magic doesn't affect her, probably by design. Istaga told us she thought that Ellie was meant to come here, so it makes sense that the defences wouldn't work on her.
It all made sense when Fliss said it. Ellie clearly had no idea what they were going through. Fliss then spoke to Ellie.
We will go with you, as far as we can, but I don't think you can rely on us for help. The magic of this place is making it almost impossible to think, and it gets worse with each step you take. It's even getting difficult to fly.
Ellie looked at them, suddenly looking a little guilty that she hadn't realised that anything was wrong. In response to Fliss's comment about it getting difficult to fly, Ellie held out an arm, and Fliss gratefully landed on it. Rake saw the wisdom of such a move and perched on Ellie's shoulder. the other side of her head from Figwhip. Blake abandoned the pigeon, perhaps for the bird's sake, and landed beside Fliss. The group continued, with Ellie in control of their fate. Ellie walked up to the wall of writhing thorns. The cool mist seemed to be swirling right up to her, but not quite touching her. When she reached the thorns, she stopped and pulled her wand out of her pocket. She wasn't quite sure what to do. As she thought about it, a dazed-looking rake fell right off her shoulder onto the ground before her. Instantly, a thorn-covered stem darted towards Rake, aiming to impale the stunned fairy. As she reactively raised her wand, ready to blast the stem into oblivion with her chaotic magic, the stem retreated just as fast as it had attacked. She stepped over the prone fairy protectively, and pointed her wand at the bush threateningly, which made the whole wall of thorns seem to retreat a little. Fliss, still lucid but looking shaky, jumped down from Ellie's arm and checked on Rake. He seemed to wake quickly, and Fliss helped him up before they both floated up to perch on her arm beside Blake, while Figwhip crouched on her shoulder still, gripping her clothes and hair a little too tightly for comfort. With her 4 small friends perched around her body, and a pigeon on her head, she took a step forward, with her wand held high and ready to unleash her power. But once again the thorny barrier retreated. Another step, and a tunnel through the living wall was beginning to form for her. Part of her thought that it might be a trap, that the thorns would close in on her at any second. She stayed ready, thoughts of intense flame prepared in her mind, ready to send through her wand should action be required. The tunnel kept forming before her, and as she made her way deeper, it began to close behind her. She thought she saw dark movements in the tangles of bushes, things other than thorns and stems, but she kept moving, speeding up, keen to be out of the deadly perimeter, and hoping that it would end soon, that the entire valley wasn't filled with the awful plants. It was dark in the bushy tunnel, light blocked by the thick thorns and mist, but eventually the tunnel began to lighten as the barrier before her began to thin. Quite suddenly, it was gone, and Ellie stepped out of the wall and beyond the mist. She was moving at a steady jog and must have gone over 200 paces to get through the deadly barricade, but now stumbled into sunlight on lush green grass. The goblin and 3 fairies recovered instantly, the magic that had befuddled them no longer present on this side of the barrier. Figwhip flipped off of her shoulder in a display of his recovered agility, while the 3 fairies took to the air, looking at ease once more. Only then did Ellie have a moment to take in the beauty of the valley before her. At one end of the valley a small river cascaded down several gentle waterfalls, leading to a serene lake in the valley floor. There were orchards, where Ellie recognized comamples among other fruits. Standing just a little down the hill, looking directly at her, was a silver stag very like the one she had seen when she had met the fairy elders near the great trees. It watched her with apparent intrigue. Blake floated over to it and seemed to communicate with it in some way. Afterward, the stag simply ignored them and continued grazing on the lush green grass that covered the valley. Down in the middle of the valley, near the lake, was a quaint house. Looking down at it, Ellie had a recurring feeling that this was all familiar, like perhaps she had been dreaming about it her whole life.